Hey guys, welcome back to Building a Family Business here on Builder Funnel Radio. This is Spencer. I'm here with Brooks and Wes. How's it going, guys?
Pretty good. How you doing, Spence?
Going great, Spence. Going great.
Right on. So we've kind of started a informal tradition of seeing what you guys are reading. So Wes, what are you digging into these days?
Oh man, I should have, sorry, I just downloaded a new book. It's by a futurist. It's really interesting. I heard him interviewed on the Adam Carolla show, and I've totally forgotten his name. So anyway, we'll just put it in the notes. Just started it, but it was the first chapter is on Uber flight, which basically is the concept of Uber trying to make business out of flying cars. And he's talking about how really all the technologies are coming together and how quickly things are changing, that we are going to see this by probably 2027, 2030. And
Wow.
helipad pads, they'll be able to offload about 4,000 people a day. You know, they probably have 15 companies that can produce a flying car that can do vertical takeoff and vertical descent and can carry 4 people, passengers plus a pilot, and then they would automate the whole thing. So everything would be run through artificial intelligence and in terms of traffic and all that kind of stuff. So, but the mandate that they laid out for what the minimum requirement was for these cars, yeah, there's probably 15, 16 companies that say they can produce that and are working on it. So it's kind of crazy, but anyway, his point is, look we got all these technologies coming together, everything's coming together, life is good, and the rate of change is going to be monumental. So, but in a positive way.
Yeah. Wow, that's wild. Well, I've been kind of waiting for teleportation. So did he say anything about that?
No, not in the first chapter. Maybe that's chapter 7 or something.
Maybe a later chapter. Well, Brooks, what are you digging into?
I have just been, well, 2 things. One, on the business side, I've been re-listening to the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, just like we were talking about that a few episodes ago. And so I've just been getting back into that. And for fun, I've been listening to a Audible book. It's called You Ought to Know Adam Wade. And it's just, this guy's a great storyteller, just tells some great stories. And so just, it's great just for enjoyment. And just, this guy just tells these stories and he just cracks me up. So You Ought to Know Adam Wade. So super funny guy.
Cool. Yeah. And for everybody, we'll drop those in the show notes. Wes, you were going to say something there?
Well, no, I was just going to ask what the last name was again.
Wade, W-A-D-E.
Oh, Wade. Okay, great.
Wade, yeah, super funny guy. If you've ever listened to the Moth main stage or the storytelling venue, they have a podcast, and he's really well known on that. So pretty fun.
Cool.
Right on. Cool. Well, today we're gonna talk about probably one of the most challenging parts of business, at least I think it is, which is the people part of it. And I know over the years, both of you have probably had your fair share of employee challenges or just interesting scenarios that you have to navigate. And so I thought it would be helpful to kind of share some war stories, so to speak, but also just some practical advice about how you navigated those situations or how you wish you would have navigated those situations looking back on it. So Wes, as we kick things off, I figured, hey, what's kind of a bizarre story that comes to mind where you were dealing with something that involved people in the business?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I've probably got a number of stories, but since we're just looking for kind of unusual stories, and these are the types of things that you bump into when you actually start managing that somehow they never brought up in management class. And it's just like, hey, here's a case study. So, anyway, what the stranger was, it wasn't a huge deal, but when I first bought the direct mail company back in 96, about 97, I noticed that there was this problem in that it's a production environment. So, we've got all these crews working on machines. So you have 2 or 3 people working on one machine, and then maybe 20 feet away, you'd have another machine, another 2 or 3 people working on it. So altogether, we had maybe 30 people working in the shop. And since it's the post office that we're working for, assembling mail, one of the things that at that time you bundled your mail together with rubber bands. And so the post office would provide you with these huge, massive bags of rubber bands, really heavy duty rubber bands. And so
this sounds like fun. Yeah.
Rubber band, all of a sudden. So you can imagine what was going on is I'd walk out onto the floor and all over, and for those of you who are just listening, I'll describe it, but in my hand, I'm holding what's known as a rubber band weapon. So what people would do is they'd take about 4 or 5 or 6 of these rubber bands, stretch them out, tie them into a knot, and then they'd have a loop on one end, and then they could shoot them at each other. And so these things were actually a little lethal, it hurt, I would imagine.
You can take an eye out.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking, just like Christmas Story, right? with a Red Ryder BB gun, man, you could take an eye out with that rubber band. So anyway, I tried different things. I'd say, hey, we got to stop doing this. You can't, this could be dangerous. And I was pretty low key. I had a pretty friendly style. I'd walk around all the machines in the morning and check in with everybody and how's your day going, and try to get everyone off to a good start. But after about 5 or 6 months, I was pretty frustrated about these rubber bands, and I wasn't making any headway. So I had to modify my style. I just called everyone into the break room. So we had 30 plus people in the break room, and I just stood in the middle of the room and it just went totally dead silent. And I raised up the rubber band and I said, the next person I see with one of these, this will be the last day you work at this company. And then I walked out. Never saw another rubber band. So that was it. They took me seriously, which I was serious. But I thought, it's kind of silly. You have to get to that point where you have to do that. But it worked. And I think the point of it for me was, well, sometimes you do have to change your style. If you're not getting the results that you want, then you're going to have to try a different tack.
Yeah. And if if you guys haven't figured out Wes's style yet, he's more, low key, like you kind of mentioned, and, anti-confrontational. So that probably was pretty difficult for you, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah. We'll talk about styles in a little bit, but yeah, for me, it was at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Brooks,
Sit down in the parking lot for 2 hours and get ready to go in and give that speech. Yeah.
Wow. Harsh.
So Brooks, you got any that come to mind?
We had this one employee that we're being in the construction business, and we always had laborers, pickup guys, and they were always hard to find. And we did not, we'll come back to, changes what you would do, but we didn't have an HR department. We just, you heard about a guy who might be good, you'd hire him. And we had this one employee that, of course back then he didn't do any sort of background checks, any drug testing, all the things that we would do, now. And so turned out this guy had a drinking problem. Turned out he had a gambling problem. And so one Saturday night he shows up at my front door of my house, drunk as a skunk, and he wants to borrow some money to so he can win at pull tabs at the local tavern. And I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to loan you any money to go play pull tabs. So in a fit of spite or indignation, we show up at work on Monday morning and the company truck's gone and the employee's gone.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so turns out he had gotten mad at me because I wouldn't loan him money to finish pull tabs because he was definitely going to win that night.
Definitely.
Stole the truck, drove it across the state, dumped it, and disappeared. We're like, well, what happened to the truck? What happened to, but we didn't put it all together till several weeks later. The police find the truck and they're like, well, hey, we found your truck down here, 300 miles away in the forest. He just dumped it in, on some forest land and never saw him again. Yeah. So from that,
so what's
some
the
other
lesson
things.
there? Yeah.
The lesson is get someone to do your HR, your human resources, even if it's a subcontractor. That's easy to do. Always have mandatory drug testing. And yeah, maybe interview people before you hire them. I don't know, we were
Maybe.
kind of
That was an
back
option.
at that point. It's like, oh, yeah, that was yeah. Oh, you have a pulse, you can drive. Oh, we wouldn't even check driver's licenses. Just like if someone would show up, it was so backwards. I can't even believe we did it that way.
Wild West of hiring.
Oh,
it sounds like you were doing the gambling there, Brooks.
Oh, and we were but 25 years old, have no idea. Just making it up as we went along. So yeah, the message there is, learn about HR. If you don't know.
So how do you learn about HR then?
Oh, really? Is that a serious question?
Yeah, I mean, Brooks just said,
well,
"Hey, you got to learn about
it is.
HR. Like, what are some good steps?"
Brooks's point is a good one, and I had written that down just as I was thinking about today's call. Is that you really do need to be solid on your HR. So I agree with Brooks in that most small companies, you really can't afford a full-time HR person. It's
Absolutely not. I mean, that can go up to 100, 150 employees. I mean, that's still small. I mean, I think you still have to come up with a way.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Wes. Sorry.
No, that's okay. But I mean, I think, we've always found that outsourcing your HR function to either another company like a PEO company, or, I think Brooks, you've done a little bit differently than using a PEO company, but find someone who's rock solid in HR and hire them to do that function, whether it's on an hourly basis or contract basis or whatever it is, but get that covered outside your company. And we can talk about some of the other benefits of using an outside person, but Brooks, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And what does PEO stand for, Wes? You've used that term before.
Oh, yeah.
Payroll,
payroll employee or something. Yeah, I'll have to look at it.
Okay, and so we in our company we use an HR consultant, and you can anybody can find one of these people. They don't have to be in your neighborhood. I mean, we could actually put a link in here if someone wanted to use somebody. This person's in Oregon State, and she did all of our interviewing. She didn't do payroll, but she handled all of the functions: background checks, interviewing, reference checking. And then she would just tee up some, 2 or 3 candidates for us for whatever position we were hiring for. And in construction, you're always hiring. You're always, even if you have a great crew now, you're like looking for people to be in the wings there to come on, building your bench as you call it. And so we did it that way. And, we were 20 people at the most, but even in our other company now, where, what do we have, 150 employees, we use that same consultant. That way. Yeah.
And I think so you have to have a screening process. You really have to think through what is my screening and hiring process. And Spencer, you've got a pretty darn good process at Builder Funnel, which I really like. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. What's your screening process and hiring process? Because I think it produces really good results.
Yeah, and that was something that, we did maybe, an interview or two, the first few times, and then you learn as you go. And so we just kept extending, the process and adding more layers and more steps. And so really, I think today we've kind of built it into a system where people see what we're doing and what we're about on social media. And so we do attract a lot of client or potential employees that way, but then they have to apply through a form on our website. They have to read through our core values, and we give them some homework assignments before they ever have that first connect call. And then they do a connect call, another call with somebody in more of a senior role. And then we start lining up individual meetings with similar roles to the one that they're applying for, so that those people on our team can interview them. And so by the time they get to the end, which is our last step, is a culture interview where we all just grab coffee and hang out in the conference room and talk and get to know each other and see if it's a good fit. we've gone through maybe 7 or 8 interviews. And so by that time, you've got a lot of hours in with that person. And that was a concept that I got from, it was actually Dave Ramsey's book, EntreLeadership.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about his hiring process, and it was really extensive. And so I just kind of modeled it after that by adding in more layers and more steps. But his point was, you're going to spend so much time with this person. Try to get as many hours in as you can with them prior, because then you've got a real good feel of who they are as a person, if they're going to be a good fit. And obviously you're looking for skills and, what they bring to the job, but there's a lot of other elements that you're looking for. And those can be tough if you only have a couple of interviews where you're just asking skills-based questions or trying to see if they can do the work. So that's how we've kind of evolved it.
How many hours, Spence, do you think you have into before you'd actually make a hire? I mean, this would be helpful, because I could tell you I'd probably have maybe 5 hours into it for our company. So yeah, so I'd be curious to know how many hours you guys have.
Yeah, let's see. We've probably got hour and a half, and then we go into the individuals, and we probably get another 2 to 3 hours there. And then I usually get an hour in near the end, and then we do a culture interview for an hour. So yeah, we're probably between 5 and 7. Yeah.
I bet you pushed 7, and that seems like a lot. But you think about how much time, how difficult it is to disentangle yourself if it's not working out. It's hard for the employee, it's hard for the employer. So, probably 7 is on the low side for probably what we should do for hiring. And
Right.
7 seems like a lot to me based on how I've hired before. And then I think about the time I spent hiring somebody, I'm like, that's nothing compared to how many hours you spend having to unwind something that does not work.
Well,
Yeah.
you go on the
Go ahead,
web
Wes.
and Google, cost of a bad hire, you get some pretty incredible numbers as to what it costs the company to have a bad hire. And as you said, Brooks, to kind of disentangle yourself from it. And, the low end is like 15 grand, which I think is wildly low. I think it's probably $100,000, dollars, or just because it's so difficult. And there's a lot of untold costs too, that you can't really measure in terms of how they impact your culture and everything else.
I mean, it just slows you down so much, because you do all the training, you get them up to speed, and then if you have to go, you basically restart that whole process. I saw, I think it was Gary Vaynerchuk, he had a nice way of framing it, which was hiring is guessing and firing is knowing. And so in thinking about that, like, you're always guessing when you make that hire, but why not give yourself the best guess possible by getting more time in?
Because they say 50% of your hires, even if you go through a pretty exhaustive process, and have a chance of not working out well. And, and on both sides, right? The employee, the person coming in, everyone wants to put on their best face as much as you, on both sides, even if you're trying not to, if you're trying to be super genuine and show what you're like, but you're always selling a little bit, you can't help it. And then, so for them, it's a risk as well. They know what the job is. They think they know what it's like, but you really don't know until you get in there and you spend a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Go ahead, Brooks.
We had an employee, we had a division, a handyman division that we had created, built up. We were doing a couple $1 million in handyman work. So it was cranking. And the person who ran that division wanted to, continue to move on and improve. And so we had another position for him. And so we went to hire for this person to run the handyman division. And, we knew exactly what we wanted, and we spent a lot of time looking for the right person. We went through 3 operations managers for that division, and the last one actually just cratered the division, and we shut it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did that cost?
Yeah, right. That's the cost of a bad hire.
Yeah, well, that just shows you too how hard hiring is. You knew what you're looking for, and you're still guessing at the end of the day, just because you don't know. You don't know a lot of stuff, and you can't know a lot of stuff. You have to ultimately make the call eventually.
We made the call. The last guy, it kind of went through two people, and they were not successful. And the last guy, he just ended up just running the business into the ground in the course of, it only took him 6 months, and
Jeez.
it was over.
Yeah.
And we just said, you know what, we're not making enough money on this to be worthwhile to do this. And so, but it was a good little business, but bad hiring.
So how do you handle kind of this HR side when it's family? When it's a cousin, a nephew, a son, a daughter, something like that. Because obviously, the dynamics change. I don't know. The more we've been talking about this, I feel like it just is different. And maybe you guys disagree. But Wes, how do you think you approach some of these issues? Is it the same or is it different?
I think that's a really super interesting question. I think if you are in the management role and you are managing family members, non-family members, then I think it's the same. At least that would be what you would strive towards is I'm going to treat a family member exactly the way I would treat a non-family member, in the way I manage them, the way I promote them, the way I compensate them. And that sends a lot of good messages. One, it sends the message to all the non-family members that so-and-so doesn't get special treatment, either positively or negatively. And so they can feel like it's a fair environment. So that's the way I would think about it in managing down. I think managing up, that's much more problematic. And I think maybe it's the same as in any business where you're trying to manage your boss. So if your boss happens to be your mom or your dad or an uncle or an aunt, or you're still going to have to manage that person because you're not going to be able to change that person out. And I guess it would be the same managing up, whether it's a family member or non-family member, other than you do have to see them at Thanksgiving. But it's the same thing with your boss. You can't manage up and get your boss so mad at you that they terminate you. You got to figure out how to do that in a proactive and a good way. So that's my thought, Brooks. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that in a lot of these situations, you have a younger person working for an older person. You'd have a son or a daughter working for a parent. You would have a nephew or a niece working for an aunt or uncle. You might have one cousin working for another cousin. But I think a lot of times when it's a younger person, then, and if you're in that situation right now where you're working for an older relative, think about, how can I be the best employee I can be? What do I need to do to increase my skill set, to improve my maturity, to improve my ability to work, for people, to be a good employee. And then that's something I always think of. I could have done a better job of that when I was younger. And you can do it now, whatever age you are, because you're always working for somebody, no matter what. So it's thinking about that. And I think as the older person, if you happen to be more mature and you're managing somebody younger, a relative younger than you, again, I think I agree with Wes's point, which is, treat everybody equally, and you'll reduce a lot of your stress. If hey, this relative is working in this customer service role and there's 10 other customer service reps, they get treated just the same. They don't get special perks, car allowance, things that wouldn't come with that role.
So how difficult is it to do that? I what I'm hearing is, striving for treating that person the same as a non-family member. I feel like you'd often see one way or the other. They either get special treatment and it's like, oh, they can get away with more stuff, or you're harder on them because you expect more from them. But I mean, have you guys been in that position? Like, how difficult is it to strive for the equal?
I don't know, Brooks, you got any?
Well, what I would suggest, one idea might be, okay, let's say you're running your business and maybe you only have 2 or 3 employees, but you brought on a nephew or niece, son or daughter, and you're trying to treat them, equally or commensurate with the other team members. members, you split yourself and you say, okay, as the boss, this is what this position pays, and this is what this is. If you want to do something else for your child or your nephew or niece, do that in another way outside the business, which is, hey, I want to, treat everybody to a nice trip. Well, that's because that's a family situation outside of the business. And you have to be very clear with that person and say, hey, here's your job. This is what it pays. If you don't like what it pays, go work somewhere else. But if this works for you, great. And then, hey, over here, I'm putting on my parent hat and I'm taking everybody on a trip. It may mean you have to go back and the person says, well, I don't have much vacation time. Okay, well, take it unpaid. That's your employee problem, not. So I think trying to consciously separate the two is totally possible, but you have to be really conscious of what you're doing and not just kind of meld it into one big pot.
I totally agree with what Brooks is saying. I think I would add one little twist to it, I guess, because in many cases, the reason that younger person has come on is the older senior person is hoping, hey, maybe this person can develop and turn into the person that will provide my exit strategy at some point. Right. So I think it's very possible to be consistent with that younger generation in terms of how you treat them from a management standpoint. But it doesn't mean that you can't go that extra step and provide that mentoring aspect as well, which is, we're in the business, we're operating the business, I'm managing you in the business, getting the task done and those types of things, but then taking time separate from that to say, okay, now let's talk about the business. Let's talk about some of the bigger issues with business. How does this business fit into the bigger picture? How do you manage? This is how I'm managing you, and this is why I'm managing you this way. So I think if you have a good enough relationship or can develop that relationship with them, which hopefully you would want to if they're going to possibly take over the business, then you can provide both of those things. A lot of it depends on the maturity level of the person who comes in, I think. But once again, that's also a telling sign, right? If they're too immature to be able to take the mentoring along with the management, they may not develop into that person who's going to be your exit strategy. So I think they can get more, but you want it to be the right kind of more. It's not more perks, it's not more this, but it can be more energy, I guess, into helping develop that person.
Yeah, I think that's super good insight. It kind of feels like what both of you guys are saying is just trying to draw the communication line. So you're saying, okay, we're in your role, or we're talking about the business, or we're talking about this separate family thing where maybe you get some nice benefits, but it's not benefits related to the business. It's just, this is what we're doing, family.
One of the things that we did, I learned this actually in a nonprofit board that I sat on, and in the nonprofit, you had your board role, you had your volunteer role, and you had your donor role. And depending which hat you were wearing depended on what you would do in that role. So switching that to a family business, you would have your family member role, you'd have your employee role, you'd have your owner role, and you might have your boss role. So depending on which hat you need to be wearing at different times. So maybe you're an owner of the business, and so you would have your owner hat for some decisions. And maybe you'd have your, maybe you're a minority investor in the business, you'd have your minority investor hat. Or you're an employee, you'd have your employee hat on. So those are the different hats you have to think about wearing. And if you think about what role am I playing right now, that's super helpful. So as you think about that, if you're a son working in the business, you're like, well, I'm have my employee hat on right now, but maybe, on Saturday I'll have my son hat on, or my daughter hat. So that's I wish I had learned that a lot sooner, I guess.
I think within a company too, you can actually develop a language around that where you'd say, hey, guess what, Bob, I'm wearing my owner hat right now for this conversation, or, hey, I'm wearing my dad hat, whatever it is. So people know where you're coming from right off the bat. And they're not going, well, I wonder if he's wearing his dad hat, or if he's wearing his owner hat, or his manager hat, or just the big jerk hat, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like it just, and especially just communicating that on both sides, you know, so that everybody knows, oh, okay, this is the hat we're both wearing, and then you can just dive right into what you need to do. Yeah, I might have to implement that here. But let's talk a little.
Well, it's interesting to think about it in terms of hats and try to think about how many hats are there. And that's why when I learned that in that nonprofit board situation, it was really helpful, because you would have a donor who might also sit on the board, who would work as a volunteer, and it would really be confusing for staff. Like, well, what authority does this person have? And are they using their donor authority because they've donated a lot of money, or are they using their board authority? So it's super interesting.
And I think you have to have some integrity around which hat you're wearing, so you don't use, say you're using one hat and then use it to get something else that you want. You know, I'm gonna use my dad to get something that I want as a manager, or vice versa. So that can be tricky. I think also it's a helpful strategy for working couples that work together, because they come home, working together all day. Now, you know, when do they transition from work life to home life? And gosh, right now, when so many people are working from home, it gets even more difficult, because you're working from home and now we're not working, and now we're interacting as spouses. So I think those types of conversations can be pretty handy.
Now, Brooks, did you ever get a bunch of these hats made up so you could just physically actually put the hats on?
We did actually for that nonprofit, and it's super helpful. I was going to do it for our current company, and I haven't done it but we haven't come back and had that conversation again, because you have to refresh on it, like anything, to remind people. And some people aren't interested in it. You know, they're just not. They don't want to participate in that kind of that level of introspection, which is, oh, which hat am I wearing? You know, some people might just be fine with, I don't really care. I just want to get what I want.
Right.
And,
yeah.
You know, I'll wear all three at the same time if I have to.
Yeah.
I think that's where it's helpful if it's coming from the top, you know, down.
Yeah.
For senior folks, it's harder to drive that sort of strategy from the bottom up.
Super hard to drive that from the bottom. You could do it. I mean, it's depending on where you are in the company. If you're at the very bottom, it's not going to happen. And the situation I was in, we had staff, but we had an executive director who drove that discussion, who was high enough up in the hierarchy to then say, hey, here is something we need to be working on. Yeah. If you're starting out at the bottom, swamping out houses or something like that, probably not going to go very far.
Yeah, but that's great. That's a really tangible example for how to navigate that situation, because I think it can be tricky. But let's talk a little bit about management styles. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about your guys' style. So Wes, maybe you can kick us off, and then Brooks, you can chime in. But Wes, what do you think your management style has been over the years? I'm sure it's evolved a little bit.
Well, I don't know. If I think about my management style, I'd probably say it's clumsy.
Tripping a lot.
So I think I always naturally, just because of my personality, embraced a kind of walking around style, you know, pretty low key, wanting to engage people, have it be collaborative, you know, feel like I'm part of a team, or they feel like they're part of a team working together. That doesn't always work, and I think the example I would produce would be in emergency situations or high stress situations. You know, then in a lot of cases, then you need to, if you've done disc profiling, you kind of need to let your D flag fly, you know, where you're high D, and you need to control the situation and really say, this is what we're doing. You're going to do this, you're going to do that, until you can get through that crisis point, and then move on. That's just kind of the way I look at it. But the thing you have to remember as a manager is that your style, whatever your default style is, I guess, whatever your default is not going to be the right style for every situation. And you got to be aware of that, because it can create problems for you if you always show up even though you want to be consistent in your presentation, but sometimes your style can get in the way.
Yeah, I would agree with that, is that you have to, if you're going to be a business owner, you want to be a leader, then you have to be introspective enough to think about, what is the right style for this situation. For me, I'm, on the disc profile, I'm a super high D, so I like to be in charge. I'm not really into collaboration or, teamwork. And those are all things that I have to work really hard at to try to bring forward.
Yeah, there's no I in team, right?
There's no I in team, absolutely, right. So I have to work very hard to work towards teamwork. It's not my natural state. But if you want to be successful as a leader and as a business owner, then you have to work way harder at it than everybody else does, because you're trying to do something with your company. And so that's where it's super challenging. I don't know how it is for you, Spence, in your situation, where if you adapt as you go, or how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, Wes and I have always been pretty similar in that style, that we're more team oriented. We like to be liked, so, having a hard conversation is harder, at least for me, because I don't want that to impact my relationship with that person. And so I struggle with that dichotomy of wanting to move the business forward and knowing the right move for the business, but then not wanting to negatively impact the relationship, or just worried that it will, so I definitely have to pull myself out of my default, and so I do think it is very situational for me, because that is my style. Oftentimes leadership or management moments require a different action than is the most comfortable action for me. So I'm uncomfortable more often, I think, in those types of
situations. I think you have to be, if you want to run a company or grow a company, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, because there's just going to be those situations where you have to, because everyone wants to be comfortable. Well, there's going to be a difference in how that works out.
I think relationships are super important. But sometimes in a business setting, if you prioritize, this is going to sound bad, but if you prioritize the relationship over results, or if you prioritize harmony over results, then you can end up in a situation where you actually don't take the necessary steps in a timely manner, because you aren't willing to step into a role that has some conflict in that. And if you're not willing to do that, then you may end up tubing your company because you're not willing to do that. I think on the flip side of it, if you're always, hey, I don't care about people, I'm all about results, whatever that means, but you need to show up every weekend, and you need to work, and you just drive your people super hard, and you don't think about the relationship. Yeah, you can do the same thing, or you won't be as successful as you could be, or you'll churn through people, as we talked about at the top of the hour, where you don't have a good process for vetting people and bringing people in, and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So there is a balance in there, but I think the managers or the folks that aren't willing to engage in conflict, they're gonna struggle in terms of what Brooks said, growing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we've mentioned the book before, but The Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink. I mean, you just described it to a point, which is you can't be all the way on one side and you can't be all the way on the other side. It's this tug in the middle, and sometimes you're shading one way or the other, but you've got to know when to flex it to one side or not. And I think that is what makes a really good manager or leader, is because you're adapting to that specific situation and what that situation calls for.
So it does require the ability to know your people. And so I think if you are a somewhat empathetic person, or then that can play to that, if you are recognizing that that's a thing that you're doing, which you're trying to find what's the right approach for this situation with this person. And what we're trying to accomplish, then that can be a little bit easier if you have some ability to read your people. If you don't, that can be a little tough.
Yeah, and one of the things that just keeps coming back to me as we're talking about it in general is that wherever you are right now, you can improve. So whatever the situation is, as you're driving down the road, listening to this, or whatever you're doing while you're listening to this, is that no matter how messed up it is at your company or how things are not working, you can improve from where you are by just making that decision to say, okay, I've got 10 relationships that are not working right. The business, there's these problems in the business, and it's thinking about what you're doing as a leader that then allows you to say, okay, I can get better at this, and I can start to, in little steps, little baby steps, fix and improve each one of these situations, and over time that will get better, even if it seems like you just have this impossible mess right now.
Yeah, that's good advice. And we got a few minutes left. I wanted to sneak in one more question for you guys today, because I think in talking about HR and the things that you're working through, you get into these moments where sometimes you have a situation where you're trying to coach somebody along, but then sometimes you have a moment where, like the rubber band example, where obviously nobody did it, but if somebody picked that up, you kind of laid your cards on the table, and that would have been an immediately fireable offense. So I'm curious to hear from you guys, like, have you ever had to fire somebody just on the spot immediately, and why was it that type of situation? Wes, can you think of any of those types of examples?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've had a number of those over the years. In one situation, I had an employee flash a knife at another employee, and
Wow.
that was terminated immediately. And I don't know that employee was really thinking anything about or whatever, but it was just like, nope, don't tolerate that. And so that was the end of that. We had a pretty strict drug use policy, and so terminated several people over the years for violation of the drug policy with random drug testing. And it's unfortunate, some good folks that did good work for the company, but it's just a black and white situation there. Had a manager once who was berating one of his employees, and I fired him on the spot just because, just that's not the way we treat other people, and couldn't tolerate it. And maybe I could have counseled him through it. I don't know. But if the situation is like, no, you're old enough and you know how to treat other people, and this is not the way we do it. And I don't care what the circumstances are. So you're gone.
Well, and it's important in that situation because you're also demonstrating for the rest of your employees how you want, what's the culture of your company, which is, hey, we do not verbally abuse people, regardless of the mistake they made. There's a proper way to discipline somebody and a proper way to help them learn to do a better job. But
Right.
yelling at them and stomping around is not the way to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Brooks, can you think of, have you ever had those situations?
When I was thinking about that question for today, the ones where I've had to terminate somebody on the spot would be for drug policy. We had an employee leave a client's house unsecured, which is just something that you just do not do. So that was just so egregious that we had to terminate him, for that. But most of them would be due to my poor management. Would be made the wrong hire, didn't manage them correctly, let a situation get beyond where it should have been without, doing a performance improvement plan. Some of these tools I didn't know about, early on in my career. And then you end up terminating somebody because it just gets so bad. Whereas if you'd done all the other things first, you could have, even if you have someone right now, you have employees like, oh, I cannot fix this situation. You could still say, well, let's put them on a PIP, performance improvement plan, and we'll work on that for 30 days. And if nothing else, it buys you 30 days to find somebody else to replace them. They kind of know where they're going. So you can start to improve your HR skills, immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think before you do anything, to Brooks's point, always check in with your HR company. Always make sure you do that. I don't care, you know, if you feel like you have to fire that person right away and that's where you're going, stop for 5 minutes, make the call, check in with your HR, describe the situation, and make sure that you're not letting your emotions run away with you. And then you can make the call. But you can always take 5 minutes to do it, even if you have to just kind of set that person aside for a minute and say, hey, I need to stay here and we're going to talk about this in a minute.
And even if you don't have an HR person right this minute, you know, you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh man, I have about 2 or 3 situations that are critical. You can easily, you know, Google, you know, HR consultant, your state, your city, talk to your CPA. You know, you can, in 10 minutes, you will find a resource, and in 30 minutes, you'll have an answer for what's the right thing to do. And most likely out of that, you're going to come out with a great resource to help grow your company with a great HR person.
I think, Brooks, though, you alluded to the idea of a kind of what I would call a post-mortem. Even after you've done this action that you felt you had to take and you took it as the right thing to do at that time, but still always go back, talk to others that were involved with the situation, think back through it and take some time and reflect on it and go, okay, what are all the things that I could have done before this? What could I have done? Don't let yourself off the hook right away. Just saying, oh, you know, they did this. Well, okay, why did they do that? Was there something earlier on I could have corrected?
And then that goes back to systems, which are, gee, what could I change in my system? And even if you don't have no system today, you say, well, I don't even have a system for that. Okay, well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to get an HR consultant. And then you're going to write down, these are my 10 steps of how I hire.
Yeah. Make yourself a learning organization, you know, make yourself a learning organization. Yeah. If you go through your career and you don't learn from each experience and you don't reflect on it, you're not getting anything out of it. You know, you're just, you're feeling like, oh, there's no pattern to anything. You know, there usually is a pattern. So try to learn.
Yeah. Oh, there's a pattern. Yeah, there is.
Yeah. Well, cool, guys. Thanks for joining me today to talk about this, and for everybody listening. Hopefully this was helpful. And sometimes I think just hearing some of these other, you know, examples or stories, just, you know, it's nice to hear that we're all going through similar challenges at different points, you know, and stuff comes up, and sometimes there's no, you know, exact playbook, but I think what you guys laid out today are like some good action steps that you can take, frameworks to apply over your situation. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next week on Builder Funnel Radio.